This is A View from the Bunker. Now, here's Derek Gilbert.
3 months ago today, the world changed as the worst attack against Israel since its reincarnation as a nation in 1948 took place. Welcome to A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. If you're watching us on YouTube, please take a moment, subscribe, youtube.com/@GilbertHouse, and click the bell for notifications. And then, if you would, take a moment and download our free mobile app at our website, VFTB.net or gilberthouse.org/app. You'll find the mobile app there, iOS, Android, Amazon, Kindle Fire. Why? Because it bypasses the gatekeepers of big tech and make sure that we are never separated, us from you. And we certainly appreciate you taking the time to do so. Joining us tonight is a gentleman with a unique perspective on the situation in the Middle East. He is a messianic, I shouldn't say messianic, let's say he was raised Muslim in Iran, moved with his family to Canada, or well, first to Paris and then to Canada at a relatively young age, and came to the Lord through prophecy, through an understanding that there are things that help us make sense of the world around us in the Bible. This actually came to him through his study of the UFO phenomenon and through the work of great men like Dr. Chuck Missler. He, in fact, produced a documentary that's available to watch for free on his website, UFOs, Angels, and Gods. But he is also a scholar of end times Bible prophecy, and we are honored to welcome back to the program Ali Siadatan. Ali, I appreciate you joining us again, especially just after coming back off the road. You were just in Florida for a conference. Tell us a little bit about the gathering.
Yes, it was a Messianic conference of leaders, and I was blessed to be there in Orlando. And of course, coming from Toronto, Canada, one of the perks is you get some warm air, and that's always a lovely thing. And so it was wonderful. Got to have some fellowship and companionship with people that I care about and are very insightful into the scriptures and the worship. So I'm really all buzzing with that vibration when you come away from a period of intense worship, study, and, fellowship.
It very timely, too, a gathering of Messianic believers, given what is happening as we record this in Israel. The war now is that began October 7th. We're just about to mark the, November, December, the 90-day mark in that conflict since the attack across the border from Gaza into southern Israel. This, from what we're hearing from friends on the ground in Israel, who are, some of whom are deployed in the IDF now by the reserves, that this probably is not going to end sooner rather than later. It is going to take some time. It looks like the IDF is really focused on destroying the infrastructure that Hamas has built in Gaza over the years. But there's more going on here than just the physical conflict. You know as well as I do that what is going on in the unseen realm is the true conflict, and what we see happening on the ground is are the shadows, the reflections of the true conflict that is taking place in the spirit realm. What do you see going on? What is the impetus of this conflict, and where does Bible prophecy say it's going to lead?
Yes, Derek. Thank you for having me to talk about this timely, matter that's so important to all of our hearts and has touched all of our lives. Everyone on the planet has been touched by those events. That itself tells you that there's something more going on here. I think that from the very beginning, the fact that it happened on the 50th day from the war, Yom Kippur War, on the Day of Atonement, it's interesting that this attack happened, first of all, on one of God's appointed days. People like to say it was a holiday, but it was actually a holy day.
Right.
And it wasn't, just any of it happened on the Feast of Sukkot, which has 8 days, and in the Leviticus 23, where the feasts are explained, we're told that the 8th day is a solemn assembly, a day of solemn assembly. It really elevates it above the other days. And it happened on that day. So it happened on one of God's appointed days, and it happened 50 years to the day, if you take into consideration the leap years. it happened exactly 50 years to the day from the last war, which happened on one of these appointed days, which was the 1973 Yom Kippur War, as they call it in Israel. And in the Arab world, they called it the Ramadan War, because that war in 1973 was during the month of Ramadan, which the Muslims consider to be their holiest month, where they, fast during the day, and it's a time of prayer and fasting and da. And so they felt they were very spiritually strong on that month, and that's perhaps one of the reasons why the attack was. And when you look at these things and you think, well, did these guys really sit down and take a piece of pen and paper and decide we're going to attack exactly on the 50th day on this appointed day? No, obviously, this is something that more powers and principalities and demons and the unseen think more along these lines than the average, Hamas leadership. And for them, it's more like, okay, maybe they'll be busy. It's a good day to attack from that point of view. The way that the Jewish people have been touched, I talk to a lot of Jewish people here where I live, and they say, that this has really awakened some deep genetic response inside of them, that they feel in their bones that this is not the usual skirmish. And the way it's affected the whole planet, there's so many things that tell us there's something demonic, behind this. So let me open up some of the signs and signals that I saw. So first of all, these appointed days, going back to the book of Genesis, what we are told in Genesis chapter 1 is that God creates a relationship between the sun, the moon, and the earth, and that this relationship is for appointed days, for the calculation of these days where God has an appointment with man. And of course, we know they all talk about the Messiah, since the Lord, was crucified on Passover. He was in the tomb during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and he was resurrected on the Feast of First Fruits, the first fruit risen from the dead. These 3 appointed days were activated, in the life of the Lord. And of course, the Holy Spirit came on the Feast of Pentecost, or Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks. You count 49 days from Passover plus 1 day. And the 50th day, and 50 is an important number, I'm going to get to that, is when the Holy Spirit descended. So these appointed days are about the Messiah. They're about the work of God. When did Israel leave Egypt? On Passover. This is where the Exodus of Israel from the deliverance through the Passover lamb on this day, the history, the story of Israel as a nation really begins on Passover. And when you look at, the Zechariah chapter 14, where we get a prophecy about the beginning of the Messianic kingdom, it happens on the last of the appointed days in the fall, Sukkot. So it's as though Israel's history begins in Egypt on Passover and ends on the Feast of Tabernacle in Jerusalem some 3,000 years later. So these appointed days, they span, it's as though history is moving forward like a spiral. And God's covenantal promises are being fulfilled on the stage of history through the cycling of these appointed days. They say history moves in circles, others say history moves in lines. I think that history moves in spiral. It moves linearly forward towards an end, but in a circular pattern, because, prophecy is also a pattern, right? So then we're told that another reason for this relationship between the sun, the moon, and stars was for signals, ot, in Hebrew. That's what it says in Genesis chapter 1. I think it's verse 4, if I'm not sure. But, you can look it up. It's easy. It says it's for signals and appointed days. And, 3 of these appointed days require that people come to Jerusalem and worship. And that's Passover, Pentecost or Shavuot, and Sukkot. And when we see is that in these 3 days, God comes and meets us. He comes and met us in the person of the Lord Jesus Christ on Passover. He came down. As people went up to Jerusalem, there was the Lamb of God. On Shavuot, on Pentecost, is when people went up to Jerusalem to worship, the Holy Spirit descended, and Peter gave his famous speech, which I believe, by the way, it happened in the temple, not in some small room somewhere, and that's why all those people were there. And the third feast that requires that people go up is the Feast of Sukkot. And that, what we see prophetically, that's when the Messiah begins his kingdom. So the Lord descends in Zechariah chapter 14. It seems somewhere around the Feast of Tabernacle, his feet touch the Mount of Olives, because at least we know his kingdom begins then, according to Zechariah chapter 14. And that's when this war occurred. This war, which had in it, unfortunately, sadly, the ravishing or raping of women and the ransacking of homes, which we are told in Zechariah chapter 14 that such a thing will occur in the final confrontation, the one that brings the Son of God, the leader of heaven's armies, to the earth. So there's a pattern again, prophecy's pattern. So there's a signaling system and appointed days. And what are the signaling systems? The signaling systems are usually understood as being eclipses. Eclipses of the sun and the moon. And there's a reason I'm saying this, because there's even an eclipse involved. So 50 days after, the War of Atonement, of the Day of Atonement, the Yom Kippur War of 1973, or October of 73, we see this happen. That was a surprise, that attack in October, because 1967 war had happened and people were, at home thinking, well, we just had this miraculous victory in 1967, the Six-Day War. They're not going to attack. And people were in the synagogues fasting. The Day of Atonement is the holiest day for the Jewish people. Even the people that are a little bit on the sideline of religion or, with a relationship with God, they will take that day seriously, and they may even fast. So really everyone is unavailable and not thinking about defense and war. And once again, the enemy nearly came in. Once again, it looked like it was going to be a devastating defeat for Israel, actually.
Right.
It caught them off guard. And it's interesting that this year we saw the movie released about that war. And you can go in the cinema and see the movie that was released with Golda Meir, who was the prime minister. And it was in October. It was a surprise. At initial, it seemed like there was going to be a victory for the enemy, but then it turned into a defeat. So there's a pattern here. And I'm just, I keep going back to my notes for this. So basically, that is interesting. That to me says right away that a war that happens on the 50th day to another war that happened on the appointed day of God, that itself should gather our attention. God is saying, pay attention. There's something more going on here. Now, it happened on the 8th day of the Feast of Tabernacle, the holiest day, the day of the solemn assembly. And that day happens to be also the day where the ancient Jewish lectionary ends. Now, when you look at the story of the Lord, he's in the synagogue of Nazareth. Now, worship happened in the temple. People had Bible study and community meetings in the synagogues at the time of the Lord. But the worship happened in the temple because you needed sacrifice. You needed, So the Lord is his family, every family in the small town of Nazareth, which I believe had 200-300 people, took turns to read the lectionary. This is an ancient lectionary. There's a portion of the 5 books of Moses read, and there's a portion from the prophets read. And it just so happened that particular Sabbath, it fell on the Lord's family, the family of Joseph and Mary. And it just so happened that it was a prophecy about the Messiahs delivering people from bondage, So maybe it was a year of Jubilee. And so the Lord then, read the prophecy. It's famous, everyone knows, Isaiah 61, and then he said, "This is about me," and they didn't like it. They wanted to, but so this is an ancient lectionary. It existed. It was in effect even 2,000 years ago, and we see it in the Gospels. So this lectionary, they read from the book of Genesis until the end of the book of Deuteronomy, and on the 8th day of Sukkot, the lectionary resets. And so they read the beginning of the next book. Now, if you look at a scroll, what does a scroll do? It goes round and round, right? And so this war happened on a day that is also called Simchat Torah. It is an important day. It is the day the lectionary ends and the new one begins. So let me just pause for a moment and put some of these ideas together. So first of all, when we look at the number 50, what we see is that 50 is the number of a new cycle. There is 50 years. There's the year of Jubilee, where all of debt is forgiven, inheritance is returned, and the cycle starts again. And we see this whole concept even, I think, working in the prophecy of the 70th week of Daniel, actually. where there's 490 years, appointed, and then there is a 10-year gap to 50. Maybe that's the millennial kingdom of the Lord. And then we have, the age of the Father, as we all go into the temple of the heart of time and space to serve as the royal priesthood. So 50 is the number of Jubilee. You look at the story of Pentecost that happens. That's why it's called Pentecost, because it means 50. And so you count all the way, and suddenly something new happens. It's a new day, and that's when the Holy Spirit comes. It's kind of 7 times 7 plus 1. It's a new beginning. Now, when you look at the Feast of Tabernacle, what is the Feast of Tabernacle? The Feast of Tabernacle is the final feast in the cycle of feasts. It begins in Passover and ends with Tabernacle. So when you celebrate the 8th day of Tabernacle, you're done with the cycle of feasts. What do you enter? A new beginning, a new cycle. When is the Feast of Tabernacle celebrated? In the harvest season. Mm-hmm. That is, it's the Feast of the Ingathering. That's why you see in the book of Zechariah the ingathering of the nations as they come to worship the King on that day. It is the final harvest that's coming in, the millennial harvest. So the greatest and most important, perhaps, of all the harvests. So it is the time of the end of the cycle of agriculture in the land and a new beginning. You plant the seeds in the spring, they grow, and now you're harvesting them. And so this is, again, the end of a cycle and a new beginning. When you look at the fact that the lectionary ends on that day, again you have another end, and then that very day, on this Simchat Torah, on the last day of Sukkot, when the lectionary ends, you read the last words of the book of Deuteronomy and the first words of the book of Genesis. Immediately the cycle resets, and once again you get a new beginning. So it's the land's agricultural cycle, the feast cycle, the idea of 50, of something new coming at the end of a cycle, and even the lectionary resets and a new beginning begins. And when you think about something I was going to say escaped my mind. So if 7 is the completion of something in Scripture, you have the 6 days of creation, 1 day of the worship of God, and that's the 7 days of creation where we get the idea of the week from. Mm-hmm. And of course, we know the book of Revelation is based on 7s. We know that there are 7 appointed days and the weekly Sabbath, which is 8, but so the idea is that 7 is a completion, 8 is a new beginning, right? I've even heard that in the Gematria, if you look at the kind of the numbers that are associated with letters in Greek as well as in Hebrew, Greek has numbers as well. The Lord Jesus Christ, when you write it out in numbers, it's 888. It's a kind of a new beginning. When is the child circumcised? On the 8th day.
8th day,
so,
right?
So there's this kind of a new beginning that happens, and when the lectionary cycle resets and you read it, what is the first book you read? The book of the beginning, right? Which begins with the words in the beginning.
Yeah.
And that's why the book is called Bereshit in Hebrew, which means in the beginning, and Genesis in Greek, which clearly speaks of beginnings. So I felt that the Lord, first of all, was arranging a lot of things. It was happening in an appointed day, and even though the enemy may decide, I'm going to poison this appointed day, because this is in Jewish tradition, this day is a day of great joy. In fact, you're commanded to be joyous on this day. And that's why there was a festival happening, in the desert where they were singing and dancing. They were not really obeying it biblically, but in the cultural spirit of such a thing. And so the enemy thinks, I'm going to poison this. That I'm told that this is how it was on the day of Atonement War of Yom Kippur, where a Jewish person thinks back, every time this year comes, it's traumatic. Every time the day comes from here on, instead of having the joy that comes from the Day of Atonement, the joy that comes from the day of Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacle, the joy you're supposed to experience, what do you have? The trauma of such a dark event. So the enemy tries to poison things. But for me, this is really signaling that somehow we are to understand that God is going to create a new beginning. Something is changing. Something is changing perhaps in the Middle East, perhaps with the movement of the towards the second coming of the Lord. And so this is the signaling new beginnings to me, but there's a lot of alignments here. Now, they turn the first week they're traumatized. They immediately declare war, which was another cycle that resembles the War of 73, because that was the last time in its history that the government of Israel officially declared war. They enacted Article 40A, 40 Aleph of, excuse me, of their law. And as they're thinking about this, they're thinking, you know what are we going to do? How are we going to respond? They're also talking to the United States and all of that. They're getting their forces together. They've immediately declared war, but a week goes by in the middle of this trauma, and suddenly we find ourselves on a new moon. And if you look at the Bible, God creates this calendar, this for the Jewish people, this holy calendar, the biblical calendar, and then he says you're going to count it from these new moons, and there's sacrifices to be offered on the new moon. So again, we have a new beginning. A biblical new month begins. And what month is it? The month of Cheshvan, which is which month? The 8th month. So again, we enter now. Now, what happens on the day of the new month? Believe it or not, you can look it up. There's an eclipse of the sun. And this eclipse is visible all through the American continent on October 14th. So a week after the attack. And there's an eclipse of the sun. So another signaling system of the Bible ignites in my thinking. And I was actually in one of these, audio rooms, I think it was on Clubhouse, of Jewish people talking about the war, and the rabbi walked in, and this idea of the eclipse came up. And I asked him about it. I said, what do you think about this eclipse? He said, well, usually the eclipse, some people see the eclipse of the sun being a judgment over the Gentile nations is about to fall. An eclipse of the moon, a judgment over Israel is about to fall. But he said it's not something that, people haven't pronounced themselves on this 100%. It's just an idea. So I thought that's interesting, whatever it may mean. We'll discover it together as these events unfold. Now, the lectionary that I spoke of, that reset on the day of this war, by the time you get to October 14th, when there's a new moon and the 8th month begins and there's an eclipse of the sun, the lectionary moves to the next chapter. Now, believe it or not, now we are in Genesis chapter 6, verse 11. And what happens, that is the very first instance in the entire Bible that the word Hamas appears.
Right, yes. The earth was filled with violence. The earth was filled with Hamas. Yeah.
Exactly. So Hamas is the acronym of an Islamic movement, which has for its mission the destruction of the state of Israel and the establishment of a caliphate. But it also is a Hebrew word. And if you want to pronounce it in Hebrew, you have to do the Hamas. And it means violence or lawlessness. And lawlessness in the Bible means rejecting the heavenly order. And so we read it, as you quoted it, in Genesis chapter 6, verse 11, that in the days before the flood, in the days of the sons of God, in the days of this very demonic period of human history, now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with Hamas. And suddenly we see these protests for Hamas appear virtually all over the planet, organized, coordinated, like as though a spirit is filling the earth. Even the supreme leader of Iran did a speech, and he said, don't you see the entire world is on our side? Even in London and even in the cities of America, people are demonstrating for Hamas. So suddenly you really felt like, this was, and there's another passage where the word Hamas appears. Unfortunately, I haven't looked it up because it just came to my mind. It's in Isaiah, and Netanyahu quoted that in one of the moments where it looked like the news cycle was saying they may not attack. He quoted that, and he said, we are going to attack, and we're going to rid the land of Hamas. That's what it says in that passage in Isaiah. So it's interesting that suddenly in the lectionary, in the second week of the war, as this new month begins, so the word Hamas appears. So for me, this is saying to me, you know what? There's something, too many alignments are occurring here when it comes to God's signaling system. Appointed days, the war happens on eclipses, lectionaries, a complete cycle of eights, new beginnings. The word Hamas appears in the reading. And so I thought, you know what? This is God saying there is something more happening here, boys and girls, and you should pay attention. And it's a demonic attack. It's from the enemy. There's no doubt about it. It was launched at a time where something important was about to happen. What was happening in the world stage? Well, Biden, Netanyahu, and MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, the leader of Saudi Arabia, came out of the blue and they made an announcement. Netanyahu appeared on Fox interview, and so did the leader of Saudi Arabia. And they said, you know what? We are about to announce a deal between Saudi Arabia and Israel. We're going to normalize relations. And Saudi Arabia is going to recognize Israel as a nation. And they called it the new Middle East. Mm-hmm. And then Biden started to say it as well. President Biden of the United States started saying, Prime Minister Netanyahu, the king of Saudi, or the prince of Saudi Arabia, and the president of the United States, they all started to declare a new Mideast, a new Mideast. The New York Times was talking about it. I read an article, the new Mideast, this is here. And this was important because the two, the holy mosques, they're called, like Mecca and Medina, are in Saudi Arabia. So the Muslims all around the world have a reverence for these holy places to them. And so if the custodians of such places normalize with Israel, it naturally sends kind of these vibes throughout the Muslim world globally that there is a movement towards normalization.
Right.
And if you look at the Abraham Accords that happened under President Trump, you already see that the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and other countries are normalizing relations with Israel. My theory is that as we're getting closer to the second coming, it seems that the sons of Ishmael, the Semitic sons, the sons of Ishmael, the sons of Keturah, the concubine that Abraham takes after the death of Sarah, and the sons of Esau are somehow the Spirit of God. Something is happening in their hearts and minds, and some of them are starting to recognize and accept the place of Jacob in God's plans and in this land. And I think that's why they are normalizing. People say it's because they're afraid of Iran, and it's a political consideration. Well, there might be more than one thing that moves the mind of a man into action.
Right.
There might be a political consideration, but there might also be a spiritual nudging coming from God as we're getting closer. We know that the Holy Land, when the Lord comes, will go from the east of the river Euphrates all the way to the Wadi in Egypt, which means that all of the lands of the Semitic people, going back to Genesis chapter 10, the land of the Semitic people is the Holy Land. So God has chosen Shem some people say Melchizedek was in fact Shem. Abraham was like 80 years old when Noah died. So Noah may have met, Abraham may have met Shem. It's possible. Some people say that that's who Melchizedek was. I'm not sure, but that's a theory that's out there. But regardless, we know that Abraham was from the line of Shem, and it is the Semitic line that God chose to be the priestly line. And so that area is going to be, so the tents of Abraham will be enlarged, and all of the sons of Abraham will live under, the hand of the tent of the Messiah. The seed of Abraham, the one in whom all the families of the earth are blessed. And so there might be a turning. That's why I think that this confrontation is mainly coming from the circle that's outside of the Semitic circle. Now we're going to the non-Arabic Islamic nations, such as Iran and such as Turkey. And I'm going to open that in a bit. But I want to just finish with what was happening in the Middle East when this demonic war happened and when these signs and signaling systems were ignited by the Almighty Lord. This normalization with Saudi Arabia was a big deal. And this war completely sidetracked it. And that's why people felt, this may have come from Iran, because this would have been very bad for Iran, and the supreme leader of Iran was yelling and making speeches every day against it. And so what happened, if you kind of go back a little bit into September, because this happened on October 7th, in September, what was happening in September? In September, there was an assembly of the United Nations in New York. And people from all the nations come to New York. So it really is like if God is going to judge the nations, and we see that in the book of Jeremiah, that God passes judgment, starting with his own people, over the nations of the earth. And we see that God will judge the nations at his second coming, that the story of the Holy Land is a metaphor for the global planet Earth, that there's a judgment, and the land, the earth, is given to the people of God. We know that God is a judge of the nations of the earth, and he speaks, today or yesterday I was listening to Micah, and it begins with God speaking to everybody, the first chapter of Micah, and Micah says, from his holy temple in heaven, God speaks to the people of the earth, so it's like this, God speaks, and so all the nations gather in New York. And when do they gather in New York? During the Feast of Atonement. So there's the Feast of Horns, the trumpets, which is on the first day of the 7th month. And then there's a period of 10 days. And on the 10th day, there is the Feast of Atonement, the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. And those 10 days in Jewish tradition are considered to be a period of judgment, where things are being weighed in the scale. That's why you confess your sins, and that's why the high priest goes in the Holy of Holies and offers a sacrifice for himself and for Israel for the atonement of the sins of Israel. And that's why the Lord ascended as the high priest to the temple at the heart of time and space and presented himself as the atonement sacrifice. As the resurrection was completed, he presented the completed action, that happened in the heavenly replica, in the earthly replica of the heavenly temple. It happened on earth, but then he went up, and it happened outside the walls of Jerusalem. But he went up there and he presented it. So this is a time where people are judged, things are judged and forgiven and atoned for if you have the sacrifice. And that's why it's important to offer the sacrifice of the Lord to God for your sins, so that your name can be written in the book of life, so that you can have atonement from your sins, because the wages of sin is death. But there are seasons of judgment. The books are open. There is the great white throne judgment in the book of Revelation, where the books are open. The deeds of men are recorded, but so are the deeds of nations. And so they in this period, which is traditionally understood to be the symbol of the atonement of the Lord, of the judgment of people. This period is when the nations gathered in the city of New York and made speeches from the podium. And the president of Iran went and made, of course, his usual anti-Semitic, anti-Israel speeches and waved the Quran around and all of that. And so perhaps, this is my conjecture, that was the time where God decided that there was going to be judgment sent out to the nations. And that was part of the spiritual equation leading to the events of the following week in Israel. This is the beginning. So God is perhaps saying, no, Biden, Netanyahu, and MBS are not going to declare a new Mideast. I am. This is going to go my way. I am the one who's going to declare the new beginning. And that's why we're getting this signaling system that keeps pointing to the idea, in my opinion, of a new beginning. And I'm sharing this with our friends and listeners who are of the Holy Spirit, just so that people think about it. I'm not saying, this is it. These are just ideas as we're all meditating on what happened and digesting it. And when you kind of look at October 7th and you think, okay, well, from the very beginning, people start to say, this really was in the favor of Iran, it seemed, because it disrupted the deal with Saudi Arabia. But perhaps there was a greater ploy from the enemy that God wanted to interrupt and say, no, this is not good for my people. This deal that seems good to you guys is not good for, this is not the kind of covenant I want my people to have with the nations around it. This is not the right one. I have an idea. And so God comes in and to judge and remove the spirit of Hamas and remove the spirit of Islamic jihad and defeat the masters and the puppeteers that are behind this attack, and cleanse the land. Because what happens with the reading of Genesis 6:11, when the earth is filled with the spirit of Hamas, what happens afterwards? Well, the waters of the flood come, and that is a cleansing. And it cleanses the earth of all of this demonic activity. And then what happens? A new beginning emerges. You know, one more time, the dry land appears the way that it did in the beginning of the book of Genesis. So even there, I see a new beginning. So the Lord might have a plan that something evil was coming against his people. An evil ploy was hatched deep in the mind of the powers and principalities. And God is like, no, excuse me, we're going to do it my way. I'm the sovereign Lord, and I have a new beginning idea. So from the very get-go, people started to say, oh, well, this attack was too sophisticated. It seems that Russian satellites were, hovering on top of that area and taking pictures. It seems that Iranian training was provided by the IRGC to these guys, even inside of Iranian territory. And we see that the leader of Hamas went, in the middle of all of this, he got up and went to Russia and met with Putin. It was televised. And, Putin likes to have people sit a million miles away from him in these long tables because he's afraid of getting poisoned and killed and stuff. But these guys were up close, sitting right across from him. This was sending, a message to the world that this guy's behind us. And so there was this idea that, and Iran was behind it. So suddenly, it opened up, October 7th, opened up the window of our mind to these nation states. And that starts to get us thinking about Ezekiel 38:39. Could this be the beginning? Because it looks like immediately. And as you mentioned, people are saying that this is not going to end quickly. This war is not going to end quickly. Now, if we are looking at this as being in the pattern of the 1973 war, that God teaches through patterns, and prophecies pattern. King David is shown a pattern of how to kill Goliath. So when he finally is, he knows how to do it. If their patterns are important in Scripture, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of the prophet Daniel, now the pattern of Antiochus Epiphanes will matter. I think the book of Ecclesiastes, there's nothing new under the sun, but what was and will be. And so there's a pattern, and all of the ages of history in the Bible are pregnant with future history, and that's why they are in the Bible. That's why when the Lord has said, how will be the end of the age, he says it'll be like the days of Noah. And it'll also be like the days of the Exodus, I imagine, the book of Revelation seems to tell us. So if there's a pattern here, because this happens 50 days to the day of another appointed day war, that was a two-front war. They didn't just come from the south, they came from the north.
Right.
So could this war extend in the pattern of 1973 to Hezbollah? So what is Hezbollah? Hezbollah is a Shia militia in Lebanon. They're Lebanese people, but they are under the support of the Islamic Republic of Iran. They are a militia that was placed there. And when Persians talk about Hezbollah, even on the Persian news, I was watching a few days ago on the diaspora news, you have to always say the Hezbollah of Lebanon. Because if you don't say that, everyone will assume you mean the Hezbollah of Iran, which is much larger, which is the mother branch. And they have branches, they have training centers virtually in every neighborhood in every city. And with the sign of the Kalashnikov. So when Iranians talk about Hezbollah, they want to talk about the little militia that's in Lebanon, they have to say the Hezbollah of Lebanon. Because if you don't make that of Lebanon precision, everyone in the conversation will assume you mean Hezbollah in Iran. So it's a religious movement. In fact, in Persian speech, the entire government of Iran is often referred to as Hezbollah, because that it means that they believe in the party of Allah. They believe in Islamic rule, right? So regardless, this militia in Lebanon called the Hezbollah is much better equipped than Hamas. Not at all equipped anywhere close to Israel, but much better equipped than Hamas. It has much more precision missiles, much more bigger guns, much more elite units, and it's been able to train there. Now, when you look at Gaza itself, the tunnel structures are far more elaborate than anything Israel had imagined, and they're going in there with trucks that they can bring entire 18 like trucks. That's how big they are. And even though they've been fighting there for all these days you mentioned, on New Year's Eve they were bombarding Israel with countless missiles. A lot of my Jewish friends, they were joking. They were saying, we don't know what New Year's is that you guys are talking about. For us, it's October 85 or something. It's like they counted, from the days of the war. And you think, after all of this dismantling of tunnels and being in Gaza, these guys still have the infrastructure to throw all these missiles after all these days? Where are they making them? How many do they have?
Right.
Where are they? A few days ago, I was watching the foreign minister of Iran on the news, and he was boasting. He was saying that not one moment have we reduced production of missiles in this war. Not for one moment have our factories underground in Gaza have had to lower their missile production in this entire war. And now Hezbollah is even better equipped than Hamas is. And so if there's a second front, the pattern of the 1973 war, so that's one way this war could expand. And so there you see, again, the tentacles of Iran. There's Russia as well as that they met. And then suddenly in the middle of all of this, the leader of Turkey, he comes on and he starts to make these virulent jihadi speeches. He starts to say, you know what? These people are not terrorists, they're jihadis. We are jihadis. We are actually going to go into jihad against, and you can look it up. I mean, I have them saved on my Twitter feed. He makes these virulent speeches in the parliament of Turkey, and then the next day he has this huge gathering in the street, and he makes the jihadi speeches, and then the crowd that's listening to him responds, we are your army and you are our leader. I mean, let's get going. So Turkey has a secular population, but it also has an Islamic portion to its population, and they are the ones that elected this particular government that's been in power for 20 years, and they have slowly, through a series of reforms and referendums, pushed Turkey away from the secularism of Atatürk. It's the founder of the modern Turkish Republic, which he created a secular republic. These guys have made a lot of reforms to bring things back in an Islamic direction. And even the army was purged during this thing called the Erdo coup. It's a long story, but the short of it is the army was accused of gathering against the president in a coup, and that was discovered and allowed Erdogan to order the removal of some very important generals from the army that were secular. So he's even Islamicizing, as much as he can the system. So suddenly he starts to cry jihad. And of course, we know that he sent this flotilla during one of the wars, to Gaza, where there was an embargo against Hamas. And Hamas itself is the Palestinian branch of the Muslim Brotherhood.
Right, which was founded in the 1920s after the caliphate in Turkey fell apart, and the whole purpose of the Muslim Brotherhood was to restore the caliphate. It was mainly an educational organization until World War II came along, and then the Nazis suggested, hey, maybe we can partner up, and then you got the Muslim Brotherhood saying, yeah, let's take some training from the SS. And so when you use the term Islamofascist, or when the term is used, it is really meant more literally than most people realize. It really was an offshoot, an unholy alliance of the fascist government of Hitler's Germany and the what had originally been an educational wing of the Muslim Brotherhood, which became the militant wing of the Muslim Brotherhood. Hamas is essentially the military arm of the Muslim Brotherhood.
Exactly, and as you said, their goal is to establish caliphate. And the Mufti of Jerusalem, he went to Berlin and met with Hitler, Haj Hosseini. And apparently, one of the guys at the Nuremberg trials say that the idea of the final solution came from him. That he said that he would, if Hitler gave him an army, he would destroy the Jews in Palestine, as it was called, the name that the Romans gave to that land, in order to really kind of, they were angry at the rebellion of the Jewish people, but that land was called Judea and Samaria, and that's why they're called Jews, because they're from Judea. And so there was this Nazi infusion into what eventually became the Muslim Brotherhood. Even the Nazi propaganda and cartoons were simply translated into Arabic and drawn in the same way that you see, in Der Spiegel and the German papers. And so that there was this infusion of this virus, this satanic virus that came into the German people. It also, that before it died in Germany, infected the Middle East quite deeply, and the Muslim Brotherhood became its fertile soil, where this vision of a caliphate, which already has in it the idea of replacing the Bible and the Jewish people and the Messiah and the Holy Land with an alternative faith. Already it is a very attacking idea. The teachings of Muhammad already attack the Word of God, but now you've infused that with Nazism, and the militancy that is embedded in the jihadi philosophy of Islam gets amplified through this virus that comes into it. That's a great point. And so this was the Egyptians, that's where the Muslim Brotherhood was born. They wrestled with the Muslim Brotherhood. And when Morsi, came to power, finally the Muslim Brotherhood, made it to the presidency of Egypt, and that then unleashed this, basically a mini revolution in Egypt, where the 8 million Coptic Christians, the more mild-minded Muslims, and the seculars joined forces behind the army and took Morsi down. And then the army really, went out to lunch and made sure the Muslim Brotherhood was just going to stay completely dismantled politically, surrounded, looked into. And so that's why they're afraid to open their borders to the Palestinians in Gaza, because most of them have this ideology, and if they come in their country, they might tip the balance. So where does the Muslim Brotherhood breed? It breeds through Erdogan in Turkey, who is a Muslim Brotherhood character.
Sure.
And he is in fact one of the main leaders of the American branch of the Muslim Brotherhood. And you can look this up. When he comes to the United States, they have incredibly giant parties for him where he sits. There's one picture where he's sitting at a giant table of all these leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood in the United States, and he's sitting there at the head of the table. And so he is one of the political... What is another place where the Muslim Brotherhood breeds? In Qatar. The Emir of Qatar has created a propaganda machine called Al Jazeera Arabic that breathes the idea of a caliphate into the minds of 500 million people every night. In fact, the Arab Spring, that everyone knows about, was in the Middle East, was called the Al Jazeera Revolution. That what he pumped into their minds all these years, let's have an Islamic Middle East, now was, could happen because of the change in power structure and the dismantling of powers. And so, ironically, Hamas has a branch in the capital of Qatar, in Doha. Mm-hmm. And so Hamas's Muslim Brotherhood, and they have a branch in Doha, Qatar. The Emir of Qatar's Muslim Brotherhood. And you know who else is Muslim Brotherhood? The Taliban of Afghanistan. Now, everyone knows that the United States went into Afghanistan in search of Osama bin Laden after the tragedy of 9/11. And was there for 20 years, and then when it pulled out, within 3 days, the Taliban took over.
Right.
It's a bit of a waste. It wasn't, because you know why? Because, and this is a bit of a sidetrack, but because this is an ideological war.
Right.
It's not a war you can win through guns and bombs.
Right.
You could have to change the hearts and minds of millions of people in order to win. That's why the solution is spiritual, not military.
It's a war against a theology, a belief. It's a spiritual war. It is not a war against a geopolitical nation state.
Exactly. So the old Taliban was Salafi. They were associated with what became ISIS. They were associated with Saudi Arabia. The new Taliban that has taken over recently in Afghanistan is Muslim Brotherhood. And so they also have an office in Doha, Qatar. So Doha, Qatar, that's where President Trump negotiated with them in Doha, Qatar.
Right.
He allowed them to have an office there because he wanted to talk to them about with the withdrawing American forces. So Doha, Qatar is where the Muslim Brotherhood, if the Hamas branch and the Taliban branch want to talk with the Emir of Qatar, who himself is Muslim Brotherhood, well, they are there. And ironically, in the way that empires of this world are mingled together, Doha, Qatar is also considered Qatar to be a non-official NATO ally. Like they're part of NATO, but not officially. And the largest military base of the United States of America is in Qatar. So this is kind of like you see the empires, being connected in some street. So that is one place to look at. Now, since the Taliban have taken over Afghanistan, they've opened the country up to Islamic militias. There's tons of madrasas that have set up there that are teaching how to overthrow governments and set up caliphate. And even though they don't all agree with the Muslim Brotherhood and the Taliban, but they allow them to live and breathe there. And so also in Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, it's flourishing, these Muslim Islamic militancy. Mm-hmm. And if you look at, for instance, Chechnya, where you remember Charlie Hebdo in Paris, where this guy drew a cartoon image of the Prophet Muhammad, who I don't consider, but the Muslims consider him prophet. And next thing you know, there was this worldwide Islamic rebellion against him, and next thing you know, he's being shot at, and people in Paris are chasing these guys in the streets. Well, one of the largest pro-demonstrations for those terrorists in the entire world was in Chechnya. And you can look it up, where close to 1 million people come, and there's these speeches that are being made in Russian. As these Chechens are speaking, 20% of what is the Russian Federation is now an Islamic world. And this connection that Putin has, with this entire world is noteworthy because Russia in the 20th century, the Soviet Union, was behind the enemies of Israel in the 6-Day War, in the 1973 war. These were socialist secular leaders of the Arab world. The Ba'athist Party, Nasser, was a socialist secular leader, and that's why he was aligned with the Soviet Union. There's always been this alignment between the Marxists and Islam. Yeah. Where did the Palestinian leadership study and do their PhDs and whatever in how to kill Jews? Well, in Russia, right? So there's been this connection, between the PLO and the Russians. The Marxist Islamist connection. Why is there that connection? Because they share the common spirit of the Antichrist. There is the Holy Spirit that was released on the day of Pentecost. But then we are told in the letter of John that there was another spirit released, which was the spirit of the pseudo-Messiah. Islam wants to replace the messianic vision of the prophets of the Bible with its own universalism. The world will become Islamic. Muhammad is the final prophet. He's brought the final word, and the Quran will be the holy book, not the Messiah's kingdom. I was watching a show here in my little town where this Christian guy wrote a book about Islam, and he was invited on a cable TV show to talk about it. And there was the leader of a very important Islamic center invited as well. And they said to him, "So, tell us about your book." And he was a Christian man. It was an Anglican priest, actually. He then basically said everything that the most ugliest thing that you could say about it. He just got up and he just said it all. It's a militant this, it's an... He said everything. As he was going, I was like shocked. I didn't think that it was going to be so... He just, boom, that was in his book. And I thought, wow, he's going to get himself the guy's going to get up and beat him up or something. And then the host of the show turned around to the Imam and said, "So Imam, what do you have to say about all of this?" And very calmly, the Imam said, "The Bible essentially says that one day, one of David's sons will rule the world. And we consider that to be a threat. And we consider our jihad to be in self-defense."
Oh.
So he didn't deny the militancy. He didn't want to say, "Oh, actually, you're right. What militancy?" And he was a very smart man. He just contextualized it as the true faith fighting the false faith.
Yeah.
So as you said, this is spiritual war against. It's a preemptive war. The return of the Jewish people has put a lot of flesh on the bones of these ancient prophecies. And it is a theological threat to Islam before it is a territorial threat. If this is true, if the Messiah is going to come, then Islam is not going to become the universal faith of the world. Muhammad wasn't the final prophet, etc., etc. It was all a lie, right? Now the Marxists, they have their own vision of the future for Earth that also collides with the prophetic vision of the prophets of Israel. They want to create a one world government. They want everyone to be communist. They want to bring everything under their control, and they want to fill it with their occult sciences and the wisdom that was given to in the days of Noah by these fallen angels to the world. And we see kind of this science as religion and all of these things coming up. And now we're seeing the rise of AI. They have this technocratic, bureaucratic, scientific, religious, cultish thing that they hide behind the idea of, no, there's no religion here. Religion is in the rest of the world, but no, there's none here. Well, meanwhile, modern science has its roots in the mystery schools.
Right.
Even going back to Copernicus and Francis Bacon and Galileo and all of these guys, and even Newton. So they're all Masons. They all had connections to the mystery schools, and they had these ideas come to them perhaps during some of their rituals. So they hide it behind, this is not a religion, but it is a religion and has all the signs and symbols of it. Why is there a pyramid with an eye on the money of America? Like, why do you put that there? Signs matter, symbols matter. Why is the crescent of the moon, this ancient sign of this fallen angel, still, so important? Why is the trident still so prevalent? Why does the eagle, So basically, these signs and symbols are those of the principalities and powers behind the world's order. And these guys in the Marxist camp, they have their own vision as well, and they feel threatened. And this is the spirit of the Antichrist, the spirit of the pseudo-Messiah, the spirit that seeks to replace the true religion, the true vision of God and the Messianic kingdom that's coming with an alternative. And so this is a spiritual attack since October 7th against the plans and designs of God as we are moving forward towards the second coming of the Lord and the establishing of this Messianic kingdom, which begins, according to Zechariah chapter 14, on the 8th day of Sukkot, of Tabernacle, the very day of this war.
Which is really significant because Sukkot was the feast at which 70 bulls were sacrificed over the course of the 7 days. 13 on the first day, 12 on the second day, 11 on the third day, and so on. The 70 representing a number that in the ancient Near East, not just with Israel, but in the entire ancient Near East, represented all of them or the complete set. This really was a reversal of an ancient ritual that took place at an ancient Syrian city called Emar that we know about, where 70 sheep were slaughtered in the spring festival, not in the fall, for Dagon, who was another name of the Canaanite creator god El, another name of Enlil, who was the chief god of the Babylonians and Akkadians. Dagon, of course, was the chief deity of the Philistine territories, interestingly, even well into the Christian era under a different name, Marnus. Dagon was the chief deity of Gaza. So this entity was having 70 sheep representing all of the gods of the nations sacrificed and offered to him. Yahweh said in the fall festival, Moses, here's what you're going to do. These represent the fallen entities, the angels of the nations, if you will, from whom I am rescuing my people. So it's very fitting that Zechariah 14 would represent his return during that time. I had thought for many, many years that perhaps would be the date. And interestingly enough, this came up during the conversation with Tom Horn about his book, The Wormwood Prophecy. Now, again, it's premised on the idea that perhaps the asteroid Apophis is wormwood, and its arrival in April of 2029 is the midway point of the 7-year Great Tribulation period. Again, those are assumptions. Whether you believe it or not, who knows? Again, those are assumptions. But if in fact that is the case, and that's the midway point, you back up 3.5 years and you find yourself on the final day of Sukkot, October 13th of 2025.
Wow.
So, is that the day that we're called out of here? The final day of the 7-day festival, which represented God rescuing his people, Yahweh rescuing his people from the Elohim over which presided over the rest of the world, the other nations, the other 70 nations, meaning everyone else but Israel.
Yes.
Who knows? No,
that's a great point. And why is it that the number of sacrifices diminishes? Why does it go in diminishing order? It's been said because it shows that throughout the ages, as God's plans move forward, God diminishes the powers of the enemy. That judgment is falling over them, and they're being diminished and judged. And the type of judgment that God delivers is an enlightening judgment. Like when you look at the word that's used for, if you bless in Genesis chapter 12, the God says, "I'll bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you." The word for curse in that passage, and I don't have the Hebrew in my head because it's a big word, but it has the word ur in it, which means light. The curse is an enlightening curse. It's different. The word curse used there is different from the word used other places. And so in Zechariah chapter 14, it says that after the Lord establishes his kingdom, the survivors of all those who came against Jerusalem will come to worship the King, the Lord, year after year on the Feast of Tabernacle.
That's right.
So the survivors of those who came to fight against Jerusalem come to worship the King. So they're enlightened. It's an enlightening judgment. I think that's why the Lord said, pray for those who persecute you, because this is the type of judgment that we bring on them, is an enlightening judgment. And so love your enemies, pray. So this is a diminishing order of sacrifices because these enemies are judged. And when it's very interesting that this is war involves the Muslim Brotherhood, which is this organization. It's a transnational religious organization. And Turkey and Qatar, and to a lesser degree Afghanistan, have... It's interesting, it involves, the president of Russia and the fact that he has a Muslim dimension to it. I'm going to come back to Russia. And of course, the big country, the Islamic Republic of Iran. So we know that Iran has been behind Hamas, funding them, protecting them, give them money for a long time. So what's going on with Iran? So when you look at the prophecy of Ezekiel 38:39, and Iran is mentioned, Paras, Persia, is mentioned as one of the countries. And it's an easy country to recognize. The other ones you have to start to do archaeology and who, what tribe and what name and what this and what that.
Right.
But Persia is there. And, once there's a Messianic teacher, his name is Jonathan Kahn, and I'd given him a ride to a talk, and he was just waiting to go up on stage to give a talk. And I guess we just met, and he realized that I was Persian. And I guess he wanted to leave me with an encouraging word before he went up on stage. Out of the blue, as we're standing there, he suddenly turned around to me and he said, "Do you know why the scepter of rule of the Persians has survived 2,500 years?" And I was like, "No, why?" And I was surprised that he knew that, because virtually no one outside the Aryan community understands that. So when Cyrus, 2,500 years ago, established central government in Iran and brought all the tribes together, he made an innovation. Instead of establishing a government based on tribal allegiances, which can eventually rip apart, he established an administrative system that had boundaries that had nothing to do with tribes. And people from every tribe served in that administrative system. And so suddenly everyone now had a say inside of that government and had a reason to pledge allegiance to it. It created a more solid system. And that administrative system still runs Iran. 2,500 years later, Iran is divided in these provinces. But these provinces are, in fact, what's left of the satrapy system that Cyrus created.
Wow.
And so for 2,500 years, there had been central government in Iran. He said, you know why there's been central government for 2,500 years, but the other empires, they collapsed, they divided into pieces? I said, no. He said, because all the other empires cursed Israel. The Greeks, let's destroy the temple. The Romans, the Babylonians. But the Persians blessed Israel. They freed them to go rebuild the temple. The decree of Cyrus ends the scriptures in the Jewish canon. The Nehemiah, build the walls of Jerusalem. Mordecai and Esther, let's kill the Amalekites. And he said, because they, of all the empires, blessed Israel. And so God blessed the rule of Cyrus, the way that he scattered and cursed the other empires. And then with those words, he went up on stage, and I was standing there thinking, wow, that was quite insightful. Thank you for that. And so that's why you can recognize Persia so easily. And when you look at Ezekiel 38, 39, and you go, okay, well, one of the countries is Iran. So in 1979, there was an Islamic revolution in Iran. And the very decree of Cyrus, which ends the Hebrew scriptures, if you look at the canon of the Bible, in the Protestant canon, the Old Testament ends with the word curse, which is not very nice. But in the Hebrew canon, before the Protestants reorganized the Old Testament, the Hebrew canon, the Tanakh, ends with the invitation to come back to Jerusalem and build the temple and serve God. That's how the Bible ends, the Old Testament ends. And that ends with the literal writing of the decree of King Cyrus. So the Jewish Bible ends with the decree of a Persian king, whose decree was inspired and commanded by a holy God. When 1979 happened in Iran, there was a revolution that toppled the importance of that connection because it ideologically changed things. The last king of Iran, the Shah, he had this huge crowning ceremonies in Persepolis for himself in the 70s, where he declared his throne as a continuation of Cyrus's throne, of the Achaemenid throne. And he went to the tomb of Cyrus in a ceremony there. And Mossad had an office in Tehran. Israel and Iran had very good relations. The Jews were building all kinds of architectural things in Iran. And the United States had two main allies. Other than Israel, the biggest ally of the United States of America in the Middle East was the Shah of Iran. Mm-hmm. So that decree of Cyrus continued to breathe life in the 20th century into the relationship between Persia and Israel and kept the principality down that governs that area. When the House of the Moon God came under the Islamic Revolution and toppled the government of Iran, it created a spiritual shift in the heavenlies where that decree was no longer respected, and the replacement theology of Islam became the dominant rule of the House of Persia. The scepter of rule changed.
That's a really insightful observation. I've long wondered about the Prince of Persia and who that might be in the spirit realm. Obviously, the Bible doesn't tell us, so we don't know. But how this shift in power in the unseen realm with whatever principality is that governs Islam, and I would argue today, differently from what I argued in the book Bad Moon Rising back in 2018, that it is Enlil or El or Dagon or Molech, as he was called by the Hebrews. Even though he is locked up in the bottomless pit, I think he still influences the world through his minions. The Prince of Persia, perhaps a different entity, or
yes, it is. But I'm writing these in a book. I'm writing. These are kind of the ideas that I'm going to include in my book. So okay. I'm sharing it with your audience. It makes more sense. The door to the principalities and powers. It's an elaborate conversation that needs to be built from scratch.
Right.
So just wait for it to come out, and we can have a conversation then.
Yeah, and I look forward to that. And I will say this: I've noticed on social media here, just in the last few weeks, what appears to be a Persian nationalist or Iranian nationalist movement of young men who are saying, "Look, this religion that has come in and has dominated our country since 1979 is an Arab religion led by an Arab god. It's spoken. The holy texts are in Arabic. All of the revered teachers are Arabic. We are not Arabs." And now they're not advocating for a return to any kind of a Christian theology or a Jewish theology. They want to return to Zoroastrianism. But I just found it very interesting that you've got this this growing movement, and I know we've talked previously that you've mentioned some of your younger relatives are perhaps feeling that Iran is missing out on its proper place in the world order because of the isolationism of the mullahs. These guys, if I'm reading their social media posts correctly, are blaming it on what they consider to be a foreign god who has come in and dominated their country for the last 40 years.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point that you brought up. You know, you have a sharp eye and you're seeing all the right things. So that's interesting because the Lord revealed to me, and again, it would be too long to go through this, but through the events of my own life, the Lord started to reveal to me that the year of Jubilee, the 50th year of the reign of the Islamic Republic, was going to be important, that this nation was going to be returned to Iran, to the Persians. You know, and so this actually I asked Jonathan about this because another time I was having lunch with him, and I said, you know, the year of the Jubilee, that applies to the Jewish people. Like, you know, I didn't want to just apply to anybody because it's in the Bible. It's a Jewish law given through the Torah to the covenant people. He said to me, yes, but the sign of it can apply to the nations. So there is this idea came to me from the Lord. I'm pretty sure it came from the Lord, because then I started to notice over the course of years what you say started to come up. No one was saying this 10 years ago. No one was saying what you just told me. No, Persians weren't saying, oh, we want our country back from an Arab invader. But gradually, I started to see that idea coming to the surface, to the point where now you're the second person who's mentioned it to me in the past month. Another friend of mine noticed it also on social media, saying, wow, these guys are saying we want our country back, we want our inheritance back. And I was like, wow. So, and when is the 50th year of the Islamic Republic? Well,
2029.
Yes. So the revolution took 1 year. So I'd say it's 28, 29, that whole year, you know, is the 50th year. The revolution began in 78 and completed in 79. That's the year of the revolution, 78, right. 79. The first events of the revolution began in 1978. And then by the time it completed and Khomeini took over, it was 1979.
Yeah.
So 78, 79. So that was always in my heart and mind, as I was watching, you know, things were happening and changing, this idea of the Jubilee. And then there's another mystery, which I made a video on this from my YouTube channel that people can watch, which is, so I think it was 2003, there was Shaul Mofaz. He was the Minister of Defense under, I think it was Ehud Barak. He was the Minister of Defense of Israel. Now, Shaul Mofaz was born in Iran. There's a lot of, you know, the Middle East had the largest number of Jewish people living in it until 1979. Because when Ezra, you know, heeded the decree of King Cyrus and took people, only 30% of the Jews went back to Israel. 70% remained in Babylon and slowly moved into the Persian world. And they've been there for 2,500 years. It's a very strong Jewish community. Now, most of them have gone to Israel since 1979. It's still there. Still, they have synagogues, they have services, they have their own hospital, they have members in parliament in Iran. But most of them have left. And so, in one of those people who left Iran was Shaul Mofaz, his family. And when he was 6 years old, they made Aliyah to Israel. And eventually he became the Minister of Defense of Israel. There was a radio show out of Jerusalem that would broadcast in Persian into Iran, run by Persian Jews. And I didn't really listen to it, but one day they announced that their guest was Shaul Mofaz, the Minister of Defense of Israel. And I thought, I didn't know he spoke Persian. And so I listened to that episode, and there he was speaking Persian, the Minister of Defense of Israel, because, you know, he spoke Persian at home with his parents. And at the end of the show, they opened the phone lines, and the woman called from Iran, and she said, you owe us a debt. Long ago, we freed you to go and rebuild your temple. You were in bondage, and we freed you to go and rebuild your temple. We are now essentially in bondage, and you owe us a debt. You've got to free us. And I don't know why those words really hit me hard. Something about it, like the Holy Spirit, I was like, wow, I'm going to keep this in the back of my mind. Then just last year, the crown prince of Iran decided to go to Jerusalem on Holocaust Memorial Day. He was invited there by Gila Gamliel, the Minister of Intelligence of Israel. She arranged it for him to go there. And of course, they went to the Western Wall and all of that. And then I was watching an interview with Gila Gamliel, and she said, this is 20 years after 2003. Now she's a Jewish woman. She's an Orthodox Jew, Minister of Defense in Israel. She said when she was at the Western Wall, the Kotel they call it, and she was praying, she said the idea came to her that the Jewish people owe a debt to the Persians and that they're going to play a role in the paying back of this debt, of the freeing of the people of Iran. And I was like, wow. Here's 20 years later, a Jewish woman saying what I heard an Iranian woman say in 2003 from Iran. And
wow.
So I made a video on it from my YouTube page, and I couldn't find the video of her saying that, but I found a Jerusalem Post op-ed that she wrote in which she said, she didn't spell it out so clearly, but she said we're going to play a role in the freeing of the people of Iran. She didn't put the we owe them a debt part, and I got the information in the Kotel at the Western Wall. And so why am I saying this? There is a revolutionary movement that has started in Iran. The conversion to Christianity is very large. The Holy Spirit has showed up in Iran, and that is changing the fabric of the culture and creating distance between the power of the principality and the people. And yes, there's a group that's saying, let's go back to Zoroastrianism. We're not Arabs. We want our country back. There's groups that have become secular, and there are groups that are become Christian in Iran. And that's going to change the face of the Middle East, because Iran, believe it or not, is the leading country of the Middle East, the trend-setting country. Since the days that God decreed that after 70 years Babylon would fall and the power, the writing on the wall, yes, then there was the Greco-Roman world, the industrial world from Russia to the U.S. dominates the old empire of Persia, but the building blocks of the power structure of the world that God gave to the principalities and powers, to the Elohim of the nations, is still there. And I would say even is coming together as the Lord has gathered Israel back from their wanderings. The empires are coming together, and that's why we see the final beast in Revelation is a completion of these empires. And so Persia will have a role to play. Right now, the Islamic version of Iran is kind of hard for them to integrate in the world order. So the people want a revolution, but the new generation, it's all about generations. The old generation is dying. The supreme leader in his 80s, everyone makes kind of cartoon fun of the head of the judiciary, who's a very, very evil man in Iran. And he's 94 years old. And he's so pry, and people, he sits on these chairs that look like thrones, and people say that the thirst for power has kept the mullahs young. And so this generation is coming to an end. And I think that's why they are more interested in their holy war than ever before. Mm-hmm. They feel the pushing of the new generation inside. So, but the country cannot do this without these guys being defeated from the outside, because they have all the weapons, they have the big guns, they have the resources of the country. And the revolution in 1979 was successful because the army turned against the king. And these guys learned from that. So they made sure they created a religious army on top of the normal army that was built around the cult of the supreme leader, which Article 5 of the Constitution says he's the vicar of Allah, basically, to put it in Christian terms. Mm-hmm. He's the representative of the Mahdi, it says in Article 5 of the Constitution. So these guys believe it, and there's a portion of the IRGC that believes it. They are serving, the representative of the 12th Imam of the Islamic Messiah. So this is how they make sure that they won't have the problem the Shah did. The army won't turn against them. So they control the big guns, they control the resources, and they have the ideology they're going to go to heaven. But a lot of if they die, but a lot of the revolutionaries in Iran, they don't have that ideology. Even though they're getting fed up and they're willing to die, but these guys need to be defeated from the outside. And so if this is the year the Jubilee is going to be important, if this is all real, October 7th suddenly has opened this connection brought it to the surface, and the world can see that the Islamic Republic is behind, one of the nations that's behind this. And when the U.S. came into Iraq and removed Saddam Hussein, that opened the gates of Mesopotamia for Persian power to pour through. And when the Persians crossed the Euphrates, they form empire. That is the tradition of the Middle East, and that's why, for the Secretary of the State, Michael Jordan, of course, Pompeo, he said, he wrote these 12 points that Iran had to accept as part of the negotiations with Trump's presidency, and one of it was they must retreat east of the Euphrates. That was one of the requirements, that Iranian power withdraw from Syria, from Lebanon, and go east of the Euphrates with the Persians. And that's the Holy Land, the Semitics. So the Persians have a Semitic side through the south, through Elam. But most of the Persians are, of course, from the tribe of the Medes. And the one tribe of Paras, of Persia, the small tribe of Persia, is, of course, itself a Japhetite tribe as well. So most of the Persians are Japhetite people with some Semitic infusion from the south. So the Semitic land, the Holy Land of that God gives the covenant to Abraham, it has the river Euphrates as one of the boundaries.
Right.
And so the Persians will be on the other side of the Euphrates in the Messianic kingdom of the Lord Jesus Christ. And so the Iran pours into the Middle East and forms what's called the Shia Crescent, which is a power structure built by General Soleimani that goes from Afghanistan through Iran and Iraq into Syria and all the way into Lebanon.
Right.
When the Arab world disavows Hamas and stops supporting them, and the Iranians begin to support Hamas, with Hezbollah, their militia, to the north, and Hamas to the south, they form what's called the Ring of Fire around Israel. Now they complete their hand. And the IRGC gradually develops this form of warfare, which Iranians call hybrid warfare, where their warfare is designed to be a combination of IRGC leadership and local militias. It's by design. And right now what they're trying to do is they have, I believe, 9 militias under their command. And there are many other militias that they support financially and give weapons to, but are not under direct command. And right now they're trying to bring all the militias under direct command. So they're another religious organization. The Constitution of Iran says the supreme leader is the leader of the Ummah, of the Ummat, which means anyone who believes in him as the representative of the Mahdi. Not the people of Iran, which is the word for in Persian would be Millat. He's not the leader of Iranian people. He's the leader of all those who buy into his religion. And that's why he has disciples from all over the world. And so it's another, like the Muslim Brotherhood, we're seeing here another transnational religious organization that has the resources of a nation state at its command, the way that the Muslim Brotherhood has the resources of Turkey, Qatar, and Afghanistan at their command. This is another. So we're looking at 2 transnational religious organizations that have command over the resources of nation states, supported not by the Soviet Union, which supported the socialist secular leaders, but supported by the Russian Federation as their industrial, patron with the big guns, the portable nukes, and the vote in the Security Council of the United Nations, the veto power. You can suddenly everyone get together, England and America, and say, no, we're gonna create some sort of vote against these Islamic force. So what does Putin have to gain? Well, Putin is cornered because of his war in Ukraine. That is another piece of the puzzle that brought Iran and Russia closer together. They're doing military cooperation. Iran has made huge inroads in drone warfare. And Iran is right now creating a drone division for Putin, for his army. I was watching a video that someone released. It isn't even having the subtitles, but it was like this secretive video that someone released on Persian Twitter, where the leader of the Air Force of Russia has come to meet the leader of the Air Force of Iran. And the leader of the Air Force of Iran says, look, drone warfare requires a division of itself. When you have airplanes and missiles, that's great. Airplanes are very powerful. Drones are very powerful. But when you combine the two together in a harmonized symphony, Air Force, drones, and missiles, you create a whole new form of warfare.
Right.
And we will come to Russia if you give us the permission, and we will create a drone division for you and teach you how this is done if you build our Air Force. and give us jets. And so Russia, the guy then says, let's do it. And they shake hands. And then a few weeks later, the official news, Russia gave these new jets to Iran. And so what Iran is doing right now is they're building their own version of the Iron Dome to make sure that the homeland is protected against any attacks that may come into the homeland in the context of a war, and that the nuclear facilities are protected and all that stuff. They're fortifying the ground-to-air missile systems. And the Russians, they feel cornered, and they tend to use the Middle East as a bargaining chip with the industrial powers. They hold on to something that's important. So Russia is like, oh, it looks like I have some Islamic friends that can cause trouble for the U.S. economy. Do you want the price of oil to be $250? Mr. Biden, on an election year, where you're trying to fight inflation and the most Americans vote on the economy, not necessarily on the wars of the Middle East. Do you want this war to become regional? I'm sitting here in the Kremlin, and these guys are my buddies. Or maybe we can work something out Ukraine side, and I might pull back a little bit on the strings here. So that's Russia's MO. When I look back to the Tsarist period of Russia and their relationship to the Middle East, that's what I see. And when I look at Putin after the fall of the Soviet Empire or the withdrawal, I don't know, it seemed very organized, but the letting go of the Eastern Europe, Putin started to focus on the Middle East and the Islamic world as a new base for Russian power. Mm-hmm. He likes his, and so Iran controls the ground. And right now, the prime minister of Iraq just announced that American forces will have to withdraw from Iraq. So it just came out today. I saw it. And so there is this, Iran controls the ground in Iraq and in Syria. And what Soleimani did is Iran was trying to get Putin to come into Syria, but they couldn't. So Soleimani went to Putin, and apparently one of his skills was he was very good at negotiation. We don't know, at least I don't know what he told him, but after that meeting, Putin said he'll come into Syria. And so the idea from General Soleimani's perspective was not only to bring Russia's support and might into that power bloc and by infusing them into Syria, but to give that bloc what Iran could not provide it, which was air power. And that's what Russia brought into Syria. They parked their jets in Latakia. And when this war, October 7th war began, and immediately the Western powers, understood that there is greater powers behind this war, or this is not a regular skirmish, and that the power structure of the world can shift to the other side, to the Russian Islamic side. So immediately the United Kingdom, the United States, and Canada, France, Germany, said we support Israel, which was kind of not usually how it's done, but they all said yes. And all of these heavy-duty American and British ships started to come in. And immediately Putin made a public announcement where he changed the missiles that were inside of his jets in Latakia, and he put in missiles that have a 1,000-kilometer range, which was, I read, was exactly the distance to hit the U.S. warships that were coming into the Mediterranean. And so in the Czech war, you see this is different. So it's like, okay, wow. Are we talking about the beginnings of the war of Gog and Magog? Is that what we're witnessing? And is that what this evil plot that's been hatched maybe by these guys against Israel to create a new Middle East in their own image? Is God suddenly now saying, no, I'm going to defeat you guys. I'm going to defeat these forces, and out of it will emerge the new Middle East in which I will be glorified and where the forces of jihad will be removed? Because when you think about these Islamic armies, there's only two ways this is going to go away once you realize this is a religious war. Or they all collectively have a mass change of heart and mind, which is unlikely.
Right.
Or they live out their belief to its final conclusion. They get together, they launch their attack, and they lose. Mm-hmm. And because they're religious people, they're not crazy, they've just been deceived. They kind of go, wow, it looks like God was with Israel after all.
Right.
Especially all the people that are watching this in the Muslim world. So this would be one way, if these guys do use October 7th in the next few years or a few months. I don't know how long it's going to take for it to come up. It looks like they're not ready. It looks like they were surprised, because the way that at least the leader of Iran operates is that he waits for signs and signals. The fact that Ukraine happened and Russia came closer to them, they're like, wow, this is a sign. The Mahdi is guiding us. This October 7th happened. Maybe he didn't order it directly. He kept encouraging in speeches leading to it that Israel is very divided right now. They're totally in infighting. They're weak. And this was his way, I think, of encouraging the militias. Like, if you guys want to do something, now is the time. And so when October 7th happened, maybe if he didn't order it, maybe he goes, wow, we just received the sign. And so this could be the beginning of this. Now, in Psalm 83,
it's possible. Well, okay, Psalm 83 is exactly where I was going to go here, because it may be that this, rather than an Ezekiel 38:39, is actually a precursor where the nearby nations around Israel, Psalm 83, as Bill Salas has written about, would be the ones involved in this conflict, and it results in an Israeli victory that could change the entire composition of the Middle East, both geopolitically but also theopolitically.
Yeah. So I think that I have a friend of mine who's a Messianic rabbi. He says, we've been in Psalm 83 since 1948. It seems that the history of Israel since 1948 till now has been one big Psalm 83. And what's interesting, Chuck Missler used to say that Psalm 83 is a trigger to Ezekiel 38:39.
Could well be.
Now, what's interesting is that there's a difference between the motivation. In Psalm 83, it's about the conspire, it says, to get rid of this nation of Israel. They have this thing in their hearts. Let's get rid of these people. Let's get rid of these nations. And that's the war cry of the Palestinians. From the river to the sea, the whole world's heard it now. Let's get rid of this people. And the people that are right around it feel they have a right to replace the Jewish people and live in this land. And so that is really the voice of this conspiracy, of this prophecy. It's 3,000 years old. We hear it on the streets of the Muslim world from these nations. But in Ezekiel 38:39, the motivation is spoil. Those nations gather to come and take spoil. Maybe they want the technology that is in Israel, because that's how the German technology that was taken by the U.S. and the Russians very much propelled those, power blocks forward. They're like, wow, why don't we go and get some of this technology out of the Silicon Valley of Israel, out of their nuclear facilities, out of this, out of that. So their motivation is different, because everyone knows that Iran and Turkey can't come and set up shop in Israel. Everyone agrees that this is not their country. No, everyone knows, even though the leader of Turkey was saying Jerusalem was part of the Turkish Caliphate. They took it from us, he says. Okay, no one's going to buy that one. So these guys have to come and leave. So they have to have a different motivation. So for me, when I see the Abraham Accord, and I see that even though there's all of these armies and people in the region that want to destroy Israel, but the 1967 and 1973 war really drained those nations militarily. It's interesting that the war of Yom Kippur on the appointed day of 1973 ended the war of the Arab world against Israel. No more did armies organize. It was only these militias, and it gave 50 years of reprieve in some ways. So when I look at modern-day Jordan, the king of Jordan, he doesn't want to really disturb the Palestinians that live in the Hashemite kingdom, because they're a majority of our. But I read in many, many reliable sources that behind the door he called, Netanyahu, and he said, kill him, destroy Hamas.
I've seen the same thing.
Yes.
They remember 1970 when they had to drive Yasser Arafat and the Palestinians out of Jordan because they tried to overthrow the Hashemite kingdom. So
exactly.
And this is another reason that Egypt does not want them in their country either. They also remember what happened in 1970, the whole Black October movement that resulted in the killing of the Israeli Olympic athletes in Munich was a consequence of Yasser Arafat trying to overthrow King Hussein of Jordan.
Yes, exactly. And the king of Saudi Arabia apparently has allowed Israeli airplanes to use his airspace to destroy anything and so these countries, they don't have an appetite, it seems. And the Abraham Accord has brought some of them even in alignment with Israel, like the United Arab Emirates.
Yep.
So what I'm seeing mostly in those countries is militias. Whether it's the Houthis, whether in Ethiopia, there are lots of Islamists that say that if you don't hate Israel, you're not a true Muslim. So the war of Ezekiel, it seems to me, when I look at those tribes, if I'm reading it correctly, doesn't involve the Semitic tribes. They're actually on the sidelines saying, what are you doing? It involves the Japhetite and Hamite tribes.
Yeah.
And so there are Hamite nations, like Libya has become a hotbed of Islamism since Gaddafi was removed. ISIS is set up there. And Al-Qaeda and other people, it's where they all get together, like the Taliban in Afghanistan. So I'm seeing militias. Where I'm seeing the power of actual nation armies that have the thirst, and they've never had a go at this. They weren't part of the 20th century wars. They haven't had their, they haven't been slapped around. They think they can take on the God of Israel. They haven't had their moment of enlightenment happen to them yet. Seem to be more the Iran and Turkey as far as Islamic nations are concerned.
Yeah.
So for me, I think that I'm leaning in the direction that yes, we are right now in definitely a Psalm 83 still pattern with Hamas and with Hezbollah and with the nations all around that are saying let's destroy Israel and replace its conspire. We're definitely there. But I can't see them reorganizing like the 20th century in these national wars. That's why I lean towards this, perhaps leading, into Ezekiel 39 there, especially because I feel the Lord, we'll have to discover together, has essentially said to me, it seems that the nation of Iran will be returned on the year of Jubilee. So I lean in the direction that, the debt will be repaid to the Iranian people. It's funny, after the crown prince was in Israel, and the minister of intelligence said that she received a prayer at the Kotel about how Israel will have a role to play. He then went to the United States and gave a speech to a Jewish lobby there, and in that speech he said, "Iran is our temple." And so he continued this, similarity between the ancient events and the modern events. Free us so we can go build our country the way that we freed you to go build your temple.
Yeah.
And so I was like, wow. So now, is Iran and Israel really going to go to war against each other? Well, the only prophesied war that I see in the Bible is Iran being part of a coalition of nations coming against Israel. Now, is this the war of Armageddon or is it a different war? Well, I find it interesting that they burn the weapons of the enemy for 7 years.
Right.
And use it as energy. I don't think you're going to do that in the kingdom of Christ.
Well,
they're going to.
This is a conversation we'll have to stretch out on another occasion, because I think that is one that we could go another hour on. And if you've noticed me looking down here, it's because Grace, our rescue dog, has been very, very patient with this, but she is now starting to get a bit restless, and so I'm going to have to return her back to the house.
Can you just, we were been talking about a spiritual battle against Israel and God answering with signs and signals. You have a tremendous insight about something in Ezekiel 38-39 that seems to be pointing to the fact that the demons and Nephilim are behind that war as well. Can you just quickly share that with us? Yeah,
very, very quickly. In Ezekiel 39, verse 11, God tells Ezekiel on that day, which I believe is the day of the Lord, which I believe is connected to Armageddon. But again, we can discuss that in more length. On that day, I will give to Gog a place for burial in Israel, the valley of the travelers east of the sea. It will block the travelers, for there Gog and all his multitude will be buried. But the key to that verse is understanding that the word travelers in Hebrew, avarim, is identical to a word that in the Canaanite Rephaim texts, Ovarim, was used of the travelers, was used of the Rephaim, I should say, as they were summoned in a ritual to the threshing floor or the tabernacle of El, which is the summit of Mount Hermon. This was in the sense that they traveled or crossed over. There are some who translate the word in Hebrew, Avarim, as those on the other side. And there's a reason that those mountains east of the sea, or the Dead Sea, or the mountains of Avarim, when Moses was summoned to climb Mount Nebo, it was this mountain of Avarim, mountain of the travelers. Again, those on the other side, not just of the Jordan River, but I think those on the other side of the veil. And this is confirmed by the Rephaim texts from ancient Ugarit, which was a Canaanite kingdom in northern Syria on the Mediterranean coast. In fact, there is a reference, an entry in the Dictionary of Deities and Demons in the Bible for travelers, and it refers specifically to Ezekiel 39:11, where they are. It said this undoubtedly is a divine designation. So the Rephaim spirits, the spirits of the giants destroyed in the flood of Noah, spirits of the Nephilim, are these travelers who will be part of the army of Gog, of Magog, whether it's Armageddon or no. That, I think, is a demonic army that will be taking part in this war against Israel.
And it can be both, because it's a prophecy's pattern. And when Joshua came into the Holy Land and devoted the cities of the Nephilim to destruction, it says in Joshua 11, there was none of the Anakim left in the land of the people of Israel, only in Gaza, in Gath, and in Ashdod did some remain. So the Nephilim remained in Gaza. That's another connection between this happening. I want to just let folks know about to my website, thinkagainproductions.com. Come over there and watch the documentary that's there. And if you want to leave a donation, you can. But follow me on Twitter. The handle on Twitter is at UFOs Angels Gods. And if you scroll to the bottom of my website, there's a Twitter link there. Follow me on Facebook at UFOs Angels Gods. Follow me on Twitter. Follow me on Facebook. I'm building the Twitter. So I appreciate it if you do that. And if you double click on the documentary that you'll see, you can go to my YouTube page and you can subscribe there and watch the videos that I upload. And while you're on the website, if you want to stay informed, put your email in and you'll get our newsletter. And I don't send too much stuff out, just a few every year, telling people about what's going on. Thank you so much for having me, Derek. It was a blessed conversation. I really enjoyed myself.
It's always an education, Ali. I really appreciate your friendship and your scholarship, and happy to have you on the program as often as we can coordinate our schedules. And we look forward to a day when we can meet face to face, perhaps have a coffee at some point and sit and just share and discuss, because these conversations, like I said, are always educational. ThinkAgainProductions.com, and more links for where you can follow Ali in the notes below this program. Again, you can follow Ali at his website, thinkagainproductions.com. Also on social media, check the show notes below, VFTB.net, or wherever you are consuming this podcast for links to how and where you can follow Ali. Coming up, removing Trump from the ballot is not breaking any norms. This coming from a so-called Christian leader. Bless his pointed little head. That and updates on where we will be in 2024 straight ahead as A View from the Bunker continues. Sharon and I really appreciate your support, and that's why every single month we want to make a special offer available to you at the Gilbert House store. And now that we're into the holidays, we're offering extra specials.
We really are. Last year we had some holiday specials that people just really enjoyed getting. Lots and lots of you went and ordered there, and we thank you for that. We're doing the same thing this year. Lots of great deals, including Red Wing Saga specials, Derek's book specials, and blowout prices on all of our DVDs.
Yes, but if you prefer streaming video, so you get instant access in full HD.
And no shipping.
And no shipping, right. We've got special discounts available now at our online streaming site, gilberthouse.org/video. That includes even our full-length travelogumentaries, our Wars of the Gods Volume 1 and Volume 2, now at a special discounted price through the end of January.
That is such a deal. And by the way, those of you who have loved Vicki Joy Anderson's book, They Only Come Out at Night, that book is also on special December and January.
We want to make this information available to you. We understand that around the holidays, finances get a little tight, so we're offering special pricing on just about everything in our online store. We're all in the middle of a battlefield.
We are.
And we all need good information. Please take advantage of our special offers, gilberthouse.org/video and gilberthouse.org/store. And thank you for your prayers and support.
Amen.
walk every Sunday night from the beautiful Missouri Ozarks. This is A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert, joined in the barn tonight by Grace the Wonder Dog, who is, again, extraordinarily patient with me tonight. In fact, I'd come out here earlier and left her back in the house, and I got a text about 2 minutes later from Sharon saying, "Where are you?" Grace is not happy. So she's been out here with me and keeping me company tonight, and keeping me calm through all this discussion, through the blessing of being able to scratch her head. Well, anyway, you'll find us online, VFTB.net. gilberthouse.org. That's our main website for everything that Sharon and I do. You'll find us on social media, X, formerly Twitter, @ViewFromBunker or @Derek Gilbert. On social media, Truth Social, Gab Me We Get Her, @Derek P. Gilbert. Russell Moore, former Southern Baptist, not social media, Southern Baptist leader and current editor-in-chief of Christianity Today, actually wrote this. And this, removing Trump from Colorado's ballot, is what he was referring to, actually isn't breaking of norms. This is the court looking at a constitutional question that is contested and making a ruling. And if what the court rules is, this isn't what the 14th Amendment is addressing, talking about those who led insurrection against the United States with the Confederate government, who were not convicted either. In other words, he's comparing President Donald Trump, U.S. president who's never been charged with or convicted of insurrection in any court, and is on record as telling people to go home, not be violent, respect the police on January 6th of 2021. Mr. Moore is comparing Trump to one of the Confederate generals who actually led an actual insurrection against the United States government. Okay. Now, what we've got here in Colorado, and we've got in Maine with the Secretary of State there, who just unilaterally decided, without any judicial support, to take Trump off the ballot there, is, yes, violation of norms here in this country. 2024 is going to be very interesting. I would just remind you as a Christian that voting Donald Trump into office will not be our salvation. We cannot vote Jesus Christ into the White House. We will not put Jesus Christ into the Supreme Court or onto the Supreme Court. But to Russell Moore, bless your pointy little head. Coming up this year, we've got a number of events. Skywatch TV is a virtual conference. Hello, Grace? Okay, she's on the other side of the table here. We will be producing a presentation for this. It's coming up in March. There will be a program coming up on Skywatch TV later in January to announce the launch date of Skywatch TV's virtual conference called Confronting the Darkness. We will be in Dallas, Texas, speaking of signs in the heavenlies, as we did with Ali, April 5th through 8th of this year. This is Hear the Watchman Conference, Signs, Prophetic Signs in the Heavenlies. Very appropriate given the fact that the total eclipse of the sun will be visible in Dallas on Monday, April 8th, which is why we'll be there through the 8th so we can watch the total eclipse of the sun from the comfort of the Hilton DFW Lakes Conference Center. And we invite you to join us. Again, April 5th through 8th. We'll be there with Paul Begley, Colonel David Giammona, Pastor Casper McLeod, David Hebner, Dr. Carrie Mayday, Dave Hodges, whose program I will be on this coming week, Michael Boldea, Tove Rose, John Moore, David Paxton, Doug Thornton. Look forward to meeting that young man. And the price for registration now just $35. So if you're in Dallas, if you're anywhere within driving distance of Dallas, if you want to fly in, the Hilton DFW Lakes is very close to the international airport, and there's a shuttle, a free shuttle. So very easy to get to the Hilton DFW Lakes, which is a great hotel, and this will be a great gathering. Join us there April 5th through 8th at the Prophetic Signs in the Heavenlies Conference. More information and registration at hearthewatchmen.com. We will be in Sparta, Missouri on June, let's see, I had this brought up here so I could bring it right to mind. There we go. June 21st through 23rd, His Call Ministries, our good friends Alec and Ginny Wade, will host us for a weekend. Sharon and I will probably be talking about the research we're doing for a forthcoming book that'll be coming out from Defender Publishing later this year. probably fourth quarter. We now have a deadline, and deadlines have a powerful way of concentrating the mind and forcing you to focus and get the manuscript done. Yes, the book will be titled The Gates of Hell. And we look forward to getting that done. That should be out come August now. By the way, you're the first that we're officially releasing this information to. So anyway, June 21st, 22nd, 23rd. This will be Friday evening, Saturday, and then Sunday morning at His Call Ministries in Sparta, Missouri, which is just south of Springfield. Beautiful location called the Spring Hill, or rather the Finley River Ranch. And we've got information at our website, gilberthouse.org, also hiscallministries.com. And of course, our tour of Israel, we backed up because of the war to November. We will be in Israel for our 2024 tour with special guest Timothy Alberino, November 3rd through 12th, with an optional 3-day extension to Jordan. And we encourage you to take advantage of that because you visit Petra, which is a bucket list item. Mount Nebo, this mountain of the travelers that I mentioned in our discussion with Ali, and more. You can find out more at gilbertsinisrael.com, gilbertsinisrael.com. If you get a spare moment to leave a review, we sure appreciate it, whether you're listening at Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Spreaker, Pandora, wherever else fine podcasts are sold, and give our Facebook page a like if you would be so kind. Our announcer, oh, by the way, should mention, the reason I'm wearing this old PID radio cap tonight, not to, because I'm a hat guy, it's because the weather today was just, had to wear a knit hat outside, left me with bad hair. It was either do this or go in the house and wet down my hair and try to clean up, and I just grabbed the first hat I could get my hand on. Some of the old merch from going back in, my goodness, I think we put these out in 2006. Anyway, if you would, again, give us a thumbs up at our website. Our announcer, DC Good, and A View from the Bunker, a production of Gilbert House Ministries, released under Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 International License. We wrestle not against flesh and blood. I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is A View from the Bunker.